Hello, everyone. We have still about 2 minutes until the start time. We'll most likely start 2 minutes after the actual start time. It's about 1:02 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, just to let people get in, because we do, again, expecting quite a large number of people to attend the boot camp. But just as a reminder to folks, many of you have already discovered, but the questions box is available to you in the GoToWebinar control panel on your screens. Please feel free to post any questions that you have throughout the session. We'll do our best to answer those questions while we're going through the session. And if we can't answer it, we'll try to get to it towards the end. Or if we can't get to it, then please post those questions on our community forum so that we can answer any questions that you may have by that means. So again, it's about 1 minute until start time, but like I said, we'll most likely start about 1:02 p.m. Eastern, so 2 minutes after the start time. Thanks. Hello, everyone. It is 1 p.m. Eastern, but we are going to wait another 2 minutes just to allow for people to be able to get in and not miss any sections of the session today. But again, as a reminder, there is a questions box that is available to you. If at any point that you have questions, please feel free to post those questions on that questions box, and we'll do our best to answer it either during or after the session. So again, we'll start in about 2 minutes. Hello, all, and welcome to the third week of the DMARC Bootcamp. Again, my name is Shazad Mirzan, Director of Operations here at Global Cyber Alliance. So this week, what we're going to be doing is we're going to go right into DMARC and talk about the DMARC tags. So last week, we talked about SPF and DCAM. We broke apart the different parts of each of those tags. So that's what we're going to do with DMARC here. And then towards the end, the latter half, we're going to do a demonstration and basically show you how to create each one of those records. And we'll be using Office 365. And for today's session, we'll be using Windows DNS to show you how to create those records. So again, just quickly reminder what DMARC is. So remember, when it comes to DMARC, there's two parts to DMARC, right? There is the DMARC policy and there's the DMARC verification, right? The DMARC policy is what the sending organization is going to implement and create, and that's what's going to define that these messages are being protected using this policy. The receiving side is what's good. They're going to focus on implementing DMARC verification. So that's typically just a check mark that they're going to be that you just need to turn on or enable on your email security gateways. So we're just going to be focusing on the policy side, right? Because the policy is what you have to actually create. You have to actually put this into place. You have to do steps and understand what the policy is and the different parts to the policy. Whereas verification, it varies across different types of systems. The options and the capabilities are different, and you'd have to have multiple sessions to go over the verification aspect of it. So really what you want to do for verification side, check to see if your email security provider has DMARC verification. See if your gateway has the capability to turn on DMARC verification, so that way you can check for all the incoming messages. So now when it comes to a DMARC policy, things that you need to know and things you need to at least have available to you. If you don't have them, it's not a stopping point. You can still continue on, you can still move on. But things you should know, just know the mail servers that you're using for your organizations, right? Because that's something you need to have in order to make sure your SPF is set up correctly. You need to have admin level access to DNS, right? Because everything that we're doing and everything we're creating is going to be on your domain name server, right? It's going to be on your public facing domain name server. So you need to make sure you have access to that. If you're not the ones responsible for it, then make sure you know who's responsible for it. Make sure you know if you have some sort of change control process that you have to go through. So like what kind of information you need to provide in order to go through that process. So those are things you need to take into account, and those are the things that you need to be aware of when it comes to the DNS side of the house. If you have subdomains, make sure you have a list of subdomains. Know what those are. And the reason you want those, and really just to take it even further, not just a list of subdomains, have a list of all your public domains. So everything that's public facing, whether they're being used for email or not being used for email, have that list available. And that list should also consist of your subdomains as well. And then if you have it, have SPF and DKIM, have them already set up. If you have it. If you do not have SPF or DKIM set up, that's not a big deal either, because you can still actually implement a DMARC record without having SPF and DKIM, but again, at a specific level, and we'll go into that in a few slides. Now, when you're creating DMARC policy in DNS, you're creating what they call a TXT record or a text record. Okay, that's what you're creating on your DNS. And whenever you're developing and creating a text record, you need to there's going to be two parts to that record. There's going to be a name or a host of that record, and there's going to be a value or a text that you need to implement, right? The host is going to be the name. This is what you're defining the record is going to be, right? So when it comes to DMARC, you must always provide a name, and that name will always be _DMARC. Right? There's no other option for it. It has to be, the underscore has to be present, and then you're going to put out DMARC. And what actually comes after the DMARC is your full domain name. Depending on the DNS system you're using, you don't have to provide the full domain name. You can just provide just the _DMARC, and it automatically appends the rest of the domain name. Okay, so that's key. _DMARC is always the name of the record that you're creating. Now, the value is going to define the policy. So these are going to be the different components that you're going to implement in that policy and define how the policy is going to be functioning for your organization and for your environment. So these are the things we're going to go through. We're going to go through each of these components. So, what does the V equals, the P equals, the RUA, and so on? What do each of these mean? And this is where we're going to break these apart in the next few slides. Right, so this is where we're going to talk about what each of those tags mean. So now I broke it down in the slides because we're going to share these slides with you, or when you come back to view the recorded session, you have at least one slide that gives you everything that you need and defines which ones are necessary and which ones are not required, and which ones are optional. So the ones required, and again, I'll break these down later. So required are the V equals, P equals, and we're saying from the GCA standpoint that RUA is required. RUA is actually optional. It is actually not required, or it's recommended. We're saying it's required, and I'll explain why it's required later on. So the V equals DMARC 1, right? That's the one you must start the value or the value of the record with. It must start with v equals DMARC1. And v is defining the version of DMARC that you're using, right? So you may have heard things about things like DMARC 2.0 and so on. It's not DMARC 2.0 right now, when people are using that terminology, are really incorporating other mechanisms that work in conjunction with DMARC. Okay, so that's when they're talking about DMARC 2.0. So right now, it's strictly when you're training the policy, it's always going to be v equals DMARC1. Okay, so there is no v equals DMARC2 at this point in time. And you're not in the future. There's not right now. There's no discussions of changing that to v equals DMARC2. If there is, just keep following us. We'll keep on top of that and share with people if that happens. But right now, there is no discussions on that happening. So you always start with v equals DMARC1. Now, the other things you're going to see as we go along is that each of these tags must be separated by a semicolon. So you're going to put v equals DMARC1, semicolon, and then the next tag that comes after that. All right, so these other tags, the ones that are recommended is RUF. Again, those are going to be dealing with reports. And then there's a good amount of items that you should consider using and some that are optional. But let me actually go right into these and then go and focus on these each one individually. But again, always start v equals DMARC1, semicolon, and then the next tag. So the second tag that has to be that appear is your P tag. The P tag is your policy, right? That's what you're defining here. So what policy level is being applied to your domain, right? So the nice thing is that with the 3 policy levels, you just define which, you just type out, write out, or spell out the policy that you're going to be putting in, right? So v equals DMARC1, semicolon, P equals none, semicolon, or quarantine or reject, right? So just spell it out, make sure you type it out correctly. I mean, I myself have spelled quarantine incorrectly quite a few times, even though I don't know how many times I spell quarantine at this point in time. Okay, so the order of the tag is important, meaning so these 2 tags, it has to be these 2 tags. V equals first, P equals second. After that, the rest of the tags I talk about, the order is not important, but it always has to be V equals, P equals, and then anything after that. So right, so now just a reminder is what these different levels are, okay? Because this is very important. This is why I'm going over it again. The policy levels, none, quarantine, and reject. So none reports possible suspicious mail messages, but it doesn't do any blocking. It doesn't block fraudulent messages that are using your domain name, right? And why are you using none? You're using none to make sure that the information that you're collecting, the reports that you get, that you review those, and that everything that in those reports are set up correctly, right? So your SPF values are passing, your SPF alignment is passing, your your DKIM is passing, and your DKIM alignment is passing, and then therefore everything is passing in terms of DMARC, right? But if it's failing, it will tell you that in the report, right? The reports will also give you the IP addresses of authorized sending servers and unauthorized sending servers, right? So that way you know who is trying to use your name, who's actually spoofing using your domain name. So then getting those reports are very important. So, but always start off at none, check those reports, review those reports for a week or a few weeks, and then, just kind of then, make sure that everything is set correctly. And then if everything is set correctly, then move up to quarantine or reject, really ultimately trying to get to reject, right? Because if you're at quarantine or reject, if these checks were to fail, right, your message is sent to the junk or spam folder if you have quarantine. So when I mean fail, so all of them have to fail. SPF, DCAM, and the alignment have to fail, right? If one passes, so if SPF passes and the alignment passes, then you're good. DMARC will pass, right? Same thing with DCAM. So if DCAM passes and DCAM alignment passes, but SPF, everything fails, you're still fine. It'll still go through. Reject, all the message is completely dropped. It's not going to be delivered at all. So it's not even get to getting to that. I mean, is there any danger of going to quarantine as the target? No. So it's a great question. So the danger of just staying at quarantine is that, remember that fraudulent messages can still be sent as you, and those fraudulent messages will still go to those spam folders. What you can end up ultimately potentially doing is confusing people. So because they could potentially see a lot of email in the junk spam folder from fraudulent, but then some messages come to the inbox. Users may think, okay, maybe it was just a mistake and got to the spam junk folder. It shouldn't have gotten there. They can potentially click on it. That's my viewpoint in terms of quarantine, because that you do run into that. You could potentially run into that issue, right? How often, I can't really say, but there's a good chance that, if you end up being part of a spam campaign and those messages go to junk spam folder and a better number of messages go to your inbox, they may just think it's a mistake and click on a link or do something or move it back to the inbox and forward it on. You don't know, but that's a risk, and you need to determine if that risk is acceptable or not. So best practice, start off with none and then slowly make up your way up to reject, right? So again, just to, so this is all you have to do when you're creating these policies. P equals none, P equals quarantine, P equals reject. Now, the ones that come after these two, it's fine. V first, P second, and then now after this, these are up to you. You can go in any order that you want. Sorry, before I get into, so here's a question. Are any repercussions to setting up DKIM with the V and the P equals none right away so we can see the reporting and work from there? No, there's no problem. So as long, that's great. Thank you for that's a great reminder. That's one of the other benefits of starting off with none. You can actually start off with the DMARC policy of none and not have SPF and DKIM set up correctly. And Mark, what you just said, that's the benefit of it, is getting those reports. Because when you get those reports, then you can go back and make sure, okay, this is what we need to fix with DKIM. This is where we need to fix SPF. You can do that. So there's no disadvantage of that or problems if you as long as you start off with none. If you start off with quarantine and reject and don't have SPF or DKIM set up properly, yeah, you can run into issues at that point. So yeah, it's fine. Go ahead and start off with none and then handle the DKIM stuff afterwards, or handle the SPF stuff afterwards if that's the way you want to go. Just realize that there might be a little bit more false positives that are appearing in those reports, meaning that if you're using a cloud service provider, you may see other domains that appear to be using yours, but they're not really using yours. They're actually, it's just because you're sharing the same server or the same system. So once you start getting SPF and DKIM in, those will go away and your reports sizes will get reduced. And then speaking of reports, the next tags are RUF and RUA. These are your reporting tags. So RUA is for aggregate reports, okay? And those are the reports that you really want to get, because those are the ones that will supply you with the information about SPF, DKIM, and the sending IP addresses and so on. RUF are your forensic reports. Those are the ones that are a little bit more detailed. And again, in next week, I'll define more. I'll go into more detail about what those reports look like. But so from our standpoint, from GCA standpoint, if you're when you're doing DMARC, you need to use RUA at minimum. You need to, we say it's a requirement. It's not required in order to have DMARC in there. But the thing is if you have a DMARC policy of none and you just put in V equals DMARC 1 semicolon, P equals none semicolon, yeah, you have a DMARC policy, but you're not doing anything with it, right? It's not doing anything for you. So meaning that you're not even getting reports, you're not blocking anything. So why do you have this policy in place? Once you start adding the RUA and the RUF tags, now you're actually using the policy for what it's intended to use, right? Because then now you have reporting enabled, and now you're receiving those reports, and then you go back and you're analyzing those reports to make the changes and adjustments that you need to make. So when you add these in, the way you do this is after that P tag, so after the semicolon, you put in RUA equals mail to colon, and then the email address that you're sending it to. Okay, and then semicolon, RUF equals mail to colon, and then the email address you're sending it to, semicolon. That's how you're going to do it. Each policy can only have one RUA tag and only one RUF tag. If you want to send to multiple addresses, you can do so, right? All you have to do is separate. So if you look at the last one here, RUA equals mail to colon, the email address, comma, mail to colon, the second email address, semicolon, and then the RUF tag. How many email addresses can you have in there? You can have really as many as you want, but it's recommended to not have more than 3 or 4. And the reason is that they've seen there's been reports that if it goes more than 3 or 4, that some of those reports don't actually make it to those email addresses. I personally have not seen that, but some other people who have done DMARC and done it longer than I have indicated that that could potentially happen. The other thing to take into account when it comes to RUF and the RUA tags, the email address. Remember, the DMARC policy is public record, right? Anyone can look up your DMARC policy, okay? So the email address you should use in here, use a generic email address. Don't use your personal work email, right? And there's a couple of reasons. One, privacy reasons, right? Because if anyone can look up your DMARC record, your DMARC policy, they can take your emails and start spamming it, right? So if you send it to something like DMARC-RUA at or DMARC-RUF at least it's going to a generic account. Then you can just go into that account and take a look at it and then share that account with other people if they then maybe need to view it. It's better to do it this way. Plus the fact that the other part is that you could potentially get multiple reports. So you can get anywhere from 5 reports, you could get 100 reports on a daily basis. Depends on how many messages and emails you send out, and how many domains you actually send email to. It's better, so because of that, it's better to send it to a generic account rather than sending it to your own personal work account. So those are a few things, and I'll reiterate those again later on. Can the RUF let us see who sent emails using a forwarding email service on your domain? It might. It depends on whether those RUF reports are actually getting delivered to you or not. But again, that's it. I'll answer those questions next week and go more into detail into that, just so we have time to go through the tags and go through the demo as well. All right, so RUA, from our standpoint, we're saying RUA is required because that's the only way you're going to make your policies effective. And then RUF, it's optional. It's up to you. I mean, I do recommend that you do consider implementing it. But again, we'll talk about some of the other things in terms of reports more specifically next week. Now, the remaining tags that I'm going to be talking about, these are optional. You do not have to put these in. If you do not put these tags or use these tags, the DMARC policy will automatically default to the default setting for that tag. So it'll automatically use the default setting for that tag. So if you don't explicitly define it, the default setting for that tag is going to be used. So the first one is the FO tag. So the FO tags, you only need this tag if you're defining your RUF tag, because it has to do with forensic or failure reports. It's basically defining when should those reports be triggered or generated. So that way the receiving side knows what's going on and how to do those. So if you have this, it's going to say, okay, depending on your setting, so 0 is the default. So it generates a report for any authentication mechanisms fail to produce an aligned pass result. All right, so in terms of alignment, 1 is for any underlying. So all means, so it has to be SPF and DKIM. For any underlying, so it's SPF or DKIM. Then where it's going to say if the aligned is the pass result. D is strictly just for DKIM, and S is strictly just for SPF. All right, so those are the values. The recommendation is either stick with the default or go with 1. All right, and the most common one I actually see is most people use actually is FO equals 1, because you want it for any underlying authentication mechanism, just not for both at once. So that's the FO tag. Then the next two are ADKIM and ASPF. This is defining the alignment aspect of DKIM and SPF, right? And you have 2 options. The default option is R, which is relaxed alignment. So relaxed alignment basically means that if the DKIM record has that domain in there, so even if it's a subdomain, it's going to allow for that DKIM alignment to go through. So like if you have sales.globalcyberalliance, marketing.globalcyber, it's going to allow those to pass. Strict means that it has to be exactly that domain name as the from address. So they have to exactly match it. If it's globalcyberalliance.org in the from, then the DKIM or the SPF has to be globalcyberalliance.org. There's no exception on that. So you have to be careful with it. So relax at the default, so you don't have to define either one of these. I don't see these two used too often. The only time really in terms of using strict alignment, if you know for sure, and this again, the only way you're going to know is by looking at the reports. If your reports constantly show that your from address always matches your SPF domain and always matches your DKIM domain, then use strict. Okay, for either ADKIM or ASPF. You don't have to use them both together. You can use one or the other. So if you know your DKIM records are all showing strict alignment, then you can put in ADKIM equals S and then leave out ASPF. You don't have to use that and leave. So then the default is relaxed. But if you want to put in ASPF equals R, you can do so just for your own sake. But that is the default value. Right, so strict or relaxed, those are your options for ADKIM or ASPF. Then there's other ones as well. So again, these are optional, but if the default value is what's going to be taken. One is the RF, the report format. So there's two options. You have AFRF and you have IODEF. So it's just to define the format of the reports. So I provided, I'm not going to go into detail about the formatting. I'm not going to do it next week either because it's just too in depth. But I provided the RFC. So if you want to look at what the difference is in terms of the format, you're more than welcome to do so. But the default is AFRF, so abuse reports format. And it's just really more along the lines of what you're going to be using in terms of if you have like a SIM type device, if you want to import those into SIM or into things like Splunk, then that's where the format may matter. But from what I've seen, ARF has always been used the default. People have always used that one, and then those are getting pulled in. Then RI is your reporting interval in seconds. This is defining how often the reports should be sent by the receiving server. The default is 24 hours, so 84,600 seconds. Then you define it in seconds. So when you put it in, you put in RI equals 84,600. So it's going to look at it as in seconds. So don't put in RI equals 24 because what it's telling you is basically telling the reporting server, send you a report every 24 seconds. Now it's just a general, so it's 24 hours. Some reporting systems just use it as a general term. They'll send it to you within 24 hours, right? So it's not exactly to be like at midnight or at noon, or it's to be within a 24-hour period. But the information that's in the report is going to be for that past 24 hours on how it's going to, in terms of what it's going to show within that report of when it sent it to you. Right, again, both of these are optional. If you don't define them, it's going to result to the default setting. RI is probably one that you may want to consider adjusting depending on how quickly you need to get it. So if you start getting reports and you start seeing a large number of spam type activity in that report, you may want to decrease the reporting interval just so you get the reports sooner so you can make adjustments quicker and then put it back up or remove the RI tag. Then there's the PCT tag. This is the percentage tag. The percentage tag is going to define what percentage of messages are going to be impacted by this DMARC policy. Okay, so what you're doing is basically a number between 0 and 100%, right? Default is 100%. So 100% of your messages are being impacted by this policy. Now, the thing is when you define this, and if you do a lower number, is you can't define or dictate which messages are going to be selected by the DMARC policy or which ones are going to be applied to the DMARC policy. That's going to be something that is going to be random. And then there's other things you have to take into account as well, right? Because if you have if your policy level is at quarantine, but you put in percentages of 0, that's like putting in P equals none, right? Because you're saying that none of my messages are going to be impacted. That just results in P equals none. Same thing with P equals reject. If you use percentage of 0, it's the same as P equals quarantine. So that's why it'll default, they'll fall back to quarantine. I mean, have people really use this? I haven't really seen people use this too much. I mean, there have been cases where people will put this in just as what they consider a safeguard. I don't really see the effectiveness of the percentage tag too much in terms of implementation and using it. My recommendation is if you're going to quarantine or going to reject, go to 100%. I mean, there's no reason you wouldn't be going to quarantine or reject unless you're sure that all your messages are actually set up correctly and being protected correctly. And then the last tag is the SP tag. So one thing I neglected to mention, the P tag before. So the P tag actually applies to your top level domain as well as your sub level domains. So if you put in a P equals reject, that reject policy automatically applies to all of your subdomains. So what happens in the situation where you have subdomains and you're actually using those subdomains for email, but they're not ready to go to reject yet, right? Because you're still working on their SPF and you're working on their DKIM. So this is where the SP tag comes into play. And the way the SP tag works is the same way as the P tag, right? The SP equals none, SP equals quarantine, or SP equals reject, right? And that tag will automatically apply to all the subdomains for that domain that you're applying this policy to, right? So the policy levels are the same. If the SP tag is not defined, it automatically defaults to your P setting. So when should you use the P tag? So one I already said, right? If you have subdomains that are used for email and they're not ready to go up to a reject or quarantine level, then move your P tag to quarantine or reject, but then add in SP equals none. So that way this policy doesn't apply to your subdomains. Or if you have no subdomains that are used for email purposes, and you're still at P equals none because you're still reviewing the reports, put in SP equals reject. So that way no one else can use subdomains. So like if you don't use subdomains for email, no reason anyone else should be able to do it. So add in SP equals reject. And that prevents those subdomains from being used. Okay, that's when you should be using the SP tag and why you should be using the SP tag. And those are the situations. So SP tag is something you should really consider using, but it is optional. You don't have to define it. It just uses the P tag settings if you do not define it. So those are all your tags, right? So like I mentioned before, you don't have to have all those in there if you don't need, because they're not required. So like you see here, the text record for basic, that's all you need to get started. You can go ahead and start from right there. And then if you want to modify the other ones as you go along, then go do so, right? Because if you end up getting these reports and then you start learning about subdomains and things like that, then you consider the SP tag and adding the SP tag in. I mean, unless you're very confident that you have no subdomains, and put in SP equals reject as one of your tags. But all you need is the V equals, P equals, then RUA and RUF. The other one's optional, and you can implement those if you choose to. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our Windows DNS, and I'm going to start showing you how things work. So let me switch to my remote desktop. So let me share that. Okay, so here we are. We have a Windows machine up and running here, and we have DNS set up on here. So what I'm going to also use is I'm going to use Office 365 as my point in terms of setting up email for this. So I have a domain called smirza.dmarc.org. So this is valid. You can send email to it, but you don't expect to get a response because I don't actually monitor the mailbox. So when it comes to Windows DNS, right? So you obviously have to have admin privileges on Windows DNS. So I'm here in Server Manager. I have Windows DNS, and I basically just have to open up the DNS Manager. So I right-click on this, go to DNS Manager, and here's all my DNS information. There are various ways of getting into this, yes, but this is just one way of getting into DNS Manager. So now in DNS Manager, this is where you're going to see all your DNS records, and these should be all your public-facing records. So this is where you should see things like your MX records. You should see your mail exchange records. You see your www and so on, right? So these addresses are also just addresses that we were given, automatically assigned to this system. But this is not a fully functional DNS system, so it's not actually recognized out there and being utilized. We're not actually allowing outbound or inbound DNS from this, but this is just to show you for test purposes what it would look like and when you're creating these. So what we're going to do is we're going to create SPF records, we're going to create DKIM records, and we're going to create DMARC records. Right, I'm going to show you how to do all three. I'm going to use Office 365, and I'm also going to show you something called DCAM Exchange. For those of you who have MS Exchange, I'm going to show you how that works as well. So let's start off with SPF. So we'll use Office 365 first. So in Office 365, when you're logged in as the admin, what you're going to do is go into the Admin Center, and then under Admin Center, you click on Show All. So in here, you have various aspects and various options that you're going to see and capabilities that you have. The nice thing about Office 365 and then most other third-party tools is that they're going to actually give you the information in terms of your domains, if you have your domain set up and your domain configuration. So for example, here I'm going into settings, I'm going into domains, and typically you always have two domains when you're using Office 365. They set up a generic one for you on Microsoft.com, and they set up .dmarc.org is the one I created. So this is the one I'm going to be focusing on. So what this will also do for you is it's going to tell you, okay, well, if you want to set this up, these are the records that you need to create in order to allow for mail to work correctly, right? You need to create an MX record. In fact, they even tell you that you need to create an SPF record and gives you the information for that SPF record. And then they have another CNAME record in terms of auto discover, right? So we already have the mail exchanger record for Office 365, but we don't have an SPF record in here, right? So we're going to create a new SPF record. So to do that, you're going to right click and you're going to choose Other New Record. And the type of record that we're going to be creating for SPF is a text or TXT record. Okay, so I'm going to choose that, create record, and then now here I'm going to define the record information, right? When you're creating records in DNS, you have a record name and you have the value that you're going to be putting in. Now remember, when you're creating an SPF record, you're not giving it a record. It's going to be a null. It's going to use your default domain name, right? So you leave this blank. Don't put anything in there. Just like I said, use parent domain if left blank. So it's going to use .dmarc.org, and that's exactly what we wanted to do. And then in here is where we're going to define the values. So now in this case with Office 365, we can always just nicely just copy this and just paste that in. And there you go. Now you have your SPF record. So I just click on OK, done, and there is my SPF. Right now, the questions may be things like, why isn't MX included? Well, we didn't need to include MX because technically this is the server that's going to be used to send our mail. But if we wanted to, if the text record already exists, you could just double click on it and then go in and modify it, add in things like MX if you had to, right? Other things we would need to include, because see, we have Exchange records. So that means we're in a hybrid type environment. So we actually have MX Exchange servers that we're running. So, but those aren't included in here. When I added MX, that automatically included those in there, right? So that MX was necessary. So now these are actually included as well. Do I need to put in MX? No, I don't have to. What I could always do is I could always put in a colon and, oops, I could put in a colon and then type out the name of the server. But just realize, remember, that's going to be part of the lookup process. So just taking those kinds of things into account. So I can always just add in, so include, because remember, a domain can only have one SPF record that applies to that top level domain, right? So there can only be one. So I say apply, okay, and there we go. So you can see SPF in this situation was not too difficult. Now the hard part is going to be going through and looking at to see, all right, are we using MailChimp? Are we using Constant Contact? Are we using Salesforce? You know, what are the third-party systems that we're using that need to get added to this? But you're going to continuously add to this one record. You can do things like nesting and stuff like that, but I mean, ultimately, there'll only be one record that's recognized as your SPF. Next is DKIM, right? So now when it comes to DKIM records, there's going to be two types of records you can create. You can create text records or you can create CNAME records, right? And that's going to be dependent on what you're using. When it comes to third-party cloud providers, typically what you end up using are CNAME records, right? They're going to define for you and to tell you what those CNAME records are, right? And how do we find those up? So you can obviously Google for it, but then one thing you can do that's nice in Office 365 is that there is a DKIM section, right? And there's actually steps you have to take because you can't just implement DKIM and have it run with these third-party providers. You actually have to go through a process, right? And the process ends up being you have to create the record. Once you create the record, then you have to go back into those admin portals for that third-party vendor and then select validate to make sure, because that's their way of validating and confirming that DKIM is actually in place, and then enabling the DKIM signing portion. So that way it's actually now signing the messages, because just because you create the record does not mean that the messages are being signed. You have to turn on the signing. So what you have to do in Office 365 is you click on Exchange. Under Exchange, there's going to be a section called Protection, whenever it comes up, right? So here's Protection. Then under Protection, you have a tab for DKIM. And this is where you have to turn on and enable DKIM. Now, the thing is by default, when it's Office 365, DKIM actually is enabled, right? And your DKIM will pass. The problem is that the DKIM signer that's enabled is for the domain .dmarc.onmicrosoft.com, right? Because you see here, the option is to disable, and then you have options for rotate. This is what's actually being used to sign .dmarc.org. What's the problem? If you can guess what the problem is alignment, right? Because if you're signing your DKIM message, if you're signing your messages with the DKIM signature of .dmarc.onmicrosoft.com, what's the domain being used? .dmarc.onmicrosoft.com. Is that the same as the from .dmarc.org? No, it's not. They're two completely different domains. They're not even subdomains. So your DKIM alignment is going to be considered failed unaligned, and if SPF fails at any point, DKIM is already considered a fail, so therefore DMARC is going to fail. So you need to actually go to .dmarc.org and turn this on and enable it, because you see it's not enabled. Now, if you do not have the records created and you click on enable, it's going to give you an error saying that these records need to be created first. And here they are. So to create a CNAME record, it does not exist. Please publish these two CNAME records first. Now, the key thing is it's just telling you the value of the record. It's not actually giving you the name of the record, right? So these are values, selector1-.dmarc.org _ domain key, and so on. So if you're savvy enough, you have to be careful because it'll disappear on you if you try to click on it. But if I had my mouse, I could probably do it a little bit better. But you can always highlight this, copy it, and then put those on the record. So now let's create these DKIM keys. So in this case, they said it's a CNAME record. So I'm back into my DNS manager. I right-click. So now I don't have to go to other record. You could do that, but you have the option right here, new alias or CNAME. So you can just select it right from the menu. I click here, and now I put in the information. Now the alias, so remember, when it comes to DKIM, the DKIM record has to have a name. So the name is going to have that selector. So in this case, when it comes to Microsoft and for MS and Office 365, it always is selector1._domain key. That is always the name. And you see automatically below here, it appends the .dmarc.org. Don't add .dmarc.org, because what did you just do? You just put your fully qualified domain in twice. So now your record isn't going to work, right? So in Windows, don't add the rest of the domain. Let it automatically append. And then here is where you're going to put in where you're actually going to. So this is where you're going to put in the CNAME records. So you're going to take this information right here, and you're going to put that into DNS. So that's selector 1-.dmarc .org ._domain key .dmarc on Microsoft. Right. I mean, there might be some misspelling errors in there, but that's okay. I mean, this is just a test machine. It's not actually live. Right. And there's our DKIM. Right. But now we need to create two. So I would choose again the new alias. This one will be selector 2._domain key. And then here's the fully qualified domain name. I'm just gonna change that from a 1 to a 2. Click on OK, and there's my selector. So the selector is going to be unique, right? That's the part that the name is being unique. It's always selector 1 and selector 2 because Office 365 requires it. You can't make up your own in this case, right? So you can't do that. You can't make up your own if you're using Office 365. You have to use what they provide to you and what they give to you. So once this is in, what I would do then is go back to got.dmarc.org, click on enable, and if all is well, this should turn on. Sometimes it'll take like 5 to 10 minutes, but sometimes it could take 24 hours or longer, depending on how well your DNS is and how well DNS is replicating. Okay. So those are your. So this is what you would do. So now this is what you're using Office 365. But say you have we have Exchange servers as well, right? So we have Exchange 1 and Exchange 2. These DKIM keys are not going to apply to the Exchange 1 and Exchange 2. It's only going to apply to any messages going through the protection.outlook.com systems. Okay, so that's that could that's potentially a problem, right? So what do we do in that situation? This is where we have the tool called DKIM Exchange. This is something you can download from GitHub. It's free, open source. You're going to need to install this on each Exchange server, right? Unless you have a gateway. If you have an email gateway and all your messages are going through that gateway, check to see if that gateway has DKIM signing and creation capabilities, right? So like Mimecast, Ironports, they have the ability to do that. So you can just do your DKIM signing there and create your DKIM keys there. You don't have, then that way you don't have to do it on each server. All right. So now, but if you don't have a gateway, but you only have the one Exchange server or 2 Exchange servers, and they send messages out from that server directly, you can use this tool. So you just download it from GitHub, and what you do in order to run it, you double click on it, click run, and this will just load the system. Now it's going to give me an error because I don't actually have Exchange on this machine. So that's why it needs to have Exchange on the system in order to recognize it, but I can still show you how to use it and how to define how you're using it, right? Because one thing you have to do is the DKIM signer. You actually have to go and install it. So you need to configure it. You need to go through the steps to configure it, defining. So basically what you're doing is defining what are your mail servers. So what are your Exchange transport agents? You're basically going to click on those and make sure everything is set up and installed correctly on those. But then the other thing you need to do is you define and create your keys. Right, so you can define DKIM settings, so you can define what algorithm level you want to use, right, and what the headers and the DKIM settings are, if you choose to use it. But it's the domain settings that's going to actually define and create the keys for you. So what you do here is you're going to click on Add, and then here type in the domain that you're creating the keys for. Here is now, since it's unique to the server, you define what the selector is going to be. So that's really up to you on what you want it to be, right? I mean, I could call it Exchange 1 if I wanted to. So that way I know it has to do with my Exchange 1 server, right? I mean, or you can leave it even generic, I can call it, GDE1 if I wanted to, right? The selector can be anything you want. You can name it anything you want, but it has to be unique, but you have to know which server you're applying this to, okay? And then once you have this, then what you're going to do is you can define your key length. So you can do either 2048 or 1024. Okay. Obviously, the larger the key size, the stronger it's going to be. Then I click on Generate New Key. I'm going to define where I'm storing the keys. So make sure the location you're storing this is only going to be somewhere where admin has access to and service has access to. So the Exchange service has access to, because it needs to be able to get to this in order to assign the keys. So click Save, and now it's generated my keys. So now my private key is in that keys folder, but now here is my public key. So it says suggested DNS record. This is what I need to put in to DNS, right? This is the name that I need to use, and this is the value that I need to use. So I'm going to click on Save Domain. So once I save domain, assuming everything else is set up, this is what is going to be used to sign. So now it could be signing all your messages, but if you don't have this in DNS, it's not going to work, right? Because there's nothing to check against. So in this situation, what do I create? I'm not going to create a CNAME, right? Because the CNAME is supposed to point to a different location. In this case, I'm creating a text record. So I right click, choose other new record, go down to text, create record, right? So now this is where I'm going to define everything that I need to create. So I'm going to take the name. So I'm going to take the first part of the name, paste it here, right? Because I don't need the full .dmarc.org because it automatically appends it. And then I'm going to take all of this here, copy it because this is the public key that's being published. Place this in here, click on OK, done. And now I have my DCAM record for Exchange 1. Then I would go through the same process again and do it for Exchange 2, right? I can't use this key for Exchange 2. I need to create a new key and with a new selector for the Exchange 2 server. So that's why, so when I run this, I'll be running this on Exchange 2 and run it to that way so I can do it for that domain. So that's how it's something you can use in terms of creating records and creating a DCAM record. All right, so we create an SPF record and we create our DCAM record. I showed you how I was using a third-party tool with the DCAM records, and I showed you how to use DCAM Exchange to create your record. So again, remember the key part to DCAM is you have to have the signing capability and a signing mechanism in place as well, right? So Microsoft Exchange by default does not have DCAM signing capabilities. If you're using Exchange Online, which is what Office 365 is basically doing, then yes, that's where you can use the DCAM and use the CNAME record. But you have to still go through that process to create the DCAM, the CNAME record, and then enable DCAM. So now let's create a DMARC record. So DMARC, right? So remember what DMARC records are, right? They're text records. So I'm going to right click, choose other new records, and then scroll down here, TXT, and start creating the record. All right, so now there are different guides out there that you can use to create DMARC records. So like GCA, we have a DMARC setup guide. You can actually go through the setup guide step by step, and at the end it gives you the record. I'm not going to go through that because that's going to take some time to go through, but I just wanted to at least create the record for you. So remember, when you're creating a DMARC record, what did I say? That you have to call the record. It has to always be _DMARC. _DMARC is going to be in lowercase, all right? _DMARC. Then now you're going to put in the text values, right? So this is where you now put in the value. So V equals DMARC1 semicolon, right? Because that's what you have to start with. Then after that, P equals none semicolon, because that's the second value, the second tag that you have to use. Now after this is whatever order I need to put in. So I could put in RUA equals mail2 : S Mirza at .dmarc.org semicolon, and then RUF equals mail2 : S Mirza at .dmarc.org semicolon. Right, and that's my basic record. That's all I need, right? I mean, I can add in all those other records that I mentioned, so I could put in RUF equals. In fact, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to add the SP tag. Why am I doing the SP tag? Because there are absolutely no subdomains for .dmarc.org, so therefore I'm adding the SP equals reject. I know because I control it. I'm the only one who has access to it. No one else in the organization has access to it. So that's why I know I can do that. And that's it. Once I do that, click on OK. Now I have a DMARC record. I have a DMARC policy of none in place. I'm getting my reports from the receiving side every 24 hours to this email address. So again, I mean, I put in my personal one, yes, because I don't have any other generic one created. But I mean, the recommendation is, again, use DMARC-RUA or just DMARC at for your organization. Don't use your personal one in there. And then if I need to modify, so now I review the reports, I check the reports. Now all I have to do is go in here and say, okay, you know what? I'm ready to go to reject. So I'm just going to change none to reject. Okay, and there you go. Now my policies are reject. And technically, I could have removed the SP tag at the end as well. Right, and that's it. That's all you're doing in terms of creating DMARC. So now the thing is, you're going to notice is that the only thing with DMARC, things that you may change is maybe the email addresses, maybe some of those additional tags, but you're going to change the P tag. But otherwise, it's going to mainly stay consistent. The things you're going to change the most are going to be your SPF records and your DKIMs. Your DKIM records are potentially things that you're going to modify and change, make the most additions to, right? You have a new marketing system that you're using, you're going to send mail through that marketing system. You don't have to change DMARC. No, you just have to add the SPF, add the value to the SPF record, and then add the DKIM keys based on what they provide to you. And there you go. The DMARC still stays at P equals reject. You don't have to make a change to that. Right, so that's the nice thing about this when the DMARC is once you set it at that point, then that's all you need to do, and that's where you'll have to make those changes to. So that's really all that you're going to do in terms of those creations and things like that. So one thing that I do want to show, I know we have about 6 minutes left, but I just want to show you a few other things. So let me delete all of these. Well, actually, no, you know what? Let me keep these for a second. So say you're actually sending, so by default, when it comes to the reports and you're putting in the values for the email addresses, you can only send reports to an email address for that domain. So if I wanted to send it to, if I want to send got.dmarc.org reports to a Global Cyber Alliance address, I can't do that. I mean, I can do that. There's additional steps that you have to do. So you can't just put in like an email address in there and send it to someone outside of your organization. Both sides have to do additional steps. It's like you can put in the email address, but the other side, they need to create a new record. They need to create a text record. Okay, so they need to create a text record that is going to define that they're willing to accept reports. And the way that record is you put in the sending organization. So say GCA.org is I want to accept reports from GCA.org. I put that dot report dot underscore DMARC dot underscore DMARC and then the rest of my domain. And then in here I put in V equals DMARC1 semicolon and that's it. So all this is doing is saying that I'm willing to accept reports from GCA.org being sent to me. So this is how you can accept reports from other domains, because in some cases you may have a .net or a .com version of your domain. This is how you can have those get sent to you rather than having to create an email address for the .net or .com version. The other thing to take into account is that say this is a domain that's not being used for email purposes. So say we don't have any mail servers. What do I do for those domains? So what you do for those domains is you're going to do two things. One, you're going to create a SPF record. Okay, you're going to create again a text record for SPF. You're going to leave the record name blank, and all you're going to put in the text is V equals SPF1 space dash all, and that's it. Nothing more than that. This is your SPF record for those domains. So the public domain. So say got.dmarc.org was just the website. We actually don't have these, right? So now I'm just protecting got.dmarc.org by putting in V equals SPF1 space dash all. So that protects you from the SPF verification side. For DMARC, what you're going to end up doing is also creating a DMARC record. So you're going to go in, create a text record. Again, same name, underscore DMARC is the name of the record. And you're going to put in V equals DMARC1 semicolon, P equals reject semicolon. And you can stop there if you choose to. You know, for my sake, I end up being curious. So I put in the RUA and RUF because I like to know in case this domain is ever being used in a spam or phishing campaign, right? So that way for business wise, if I can tell my customer service team, like, yes, we're getting spam with this, tell people to ignore it. So that way it makes us look good to say that we already know that we're getting spammed. So just go ahead and make those changes. So V equals DMARC1 semicolon, P equals reject semicolon, and you can put in the other tags, RUA, RUF. I recommend that you do, but that's really up to you. And that's it. I mean, that's all. These are the two records that you need if you have a public domain that's not being used for email. Just add those two records and you're set. You've now protected those from and preventing those domains from actually being used. So I know this is a lot of information. That we have documentation that contains a lot of this as well that we're going to be sharing on our resources page. So don't worry about trying to have copied all this or try to write us all down. All of this is also going to be available and provided to you. So the recording will be provided to you, and in a link. We also have the Bootcamp resources page that's available to you. So the next step is in the action that we're asking folks to do now is go ahead and implement DMARC of none, right? We showed you how to create it. We showed you how to put it in. Go ahead and put them in there. And if you have questions, ask them. Email us or go to the community forum and put in, the questions that you may have. Or feel free to contact me directly, and I'm happy to talk to you through the process. I'm happy to to help you get through the steps that you need to get through. So just so we're here to help. Right? We're not just here to go through the boot camp and leave you in a lurch. We're here to help and guide you through and help you in anywhere we can in the process. So the next webinar, so we are repeating this tomorrow and on Thursday, but the first half is going to be the repeat. The second half will be using a bind system, so Linux DNS, and on Thursday we're going to use Cloud DNS. So if you're going through if you're attending the Wednesday and Thursday sessions, first half will be the same exact thing that we just did today. The second half will just be those particular servers. And then next week is just going to be on the reporting. So there's a lot of questions on reporting. I'm going to hopefully answer all those questions that people have about reports next week. And I'm going to leave those because a lot of the questions that I see here are mainly based on for the report. So I'm going to leave those there. And let me see if I can get through a few. I know it's 2 o'clock. I'll stay on for another minute to just answer a few more questions. So one question was, are the values case sensitive? So for V equals, it has to be capitalized. DMARC 1, it has to be capitalized. After that, I haven't seen any issues in terms of capitalization. Mainly, I've seen that everything stay in lowercase. So my recommendation is to stay in lowercase except for DMARC. The V equals, the DMARC 1 needs to be capitalized. If I use Windows DNS for internal routing to servers, should I put DMARC records here also or just my external? DMARC records only on your external DNS. As same with SPF and DKIM, only on your external DNS. Do not put them in your internal servers. So you could potentially cause issues when you do that. Right, yeah, so public facing DNS, not internal DNS. So I have an internal DNS. So again, yeah, even if you're using local, so if you're using internal DNS and if your mail server is Google, you have to have an external DNS. You're going to have an external DNS server. You need to set up SPF. So same with G Suites, right, or Google. You need to set up SPF. You need to set up DKIM, and you need to set up DMARC. Google will define what SPF is. They'll create a DKIM key for you. You just have to go through the steps that are there. When you create an alias email address, do you need to have an active subdomain? Yeah, you don't have to have an active subdomain as long as the alias is working correctly and you'd be able to get mail for it. Just take into account when you're creating the DMARC policy is going to apply to that subdomain that you're using as an alias as well. So even if it's not defined, it still will be used. And the last question I'm going to take is, what will you be using for Cloud DNS session, Azure, Amazon? So I'm still going to be using Office 365 as the main aspect of it, but when I mean Cloud DNS, I mean using things like Google Cloud DNS, or using 1&1, or using GoDaddy. That's what I'm talking about. So because typically when you're using Azure or Amazon, you're actually using a Windows or a Linux-based DNS in most cases, unless you're using Amazon Route 53. That's a different situation. But I'm talking about those because like right now, that remote desktop, that server I was using it on Azure. That was an Azure VM that I stood up with using Windows 2005 and using DNS there. All right, so if the remaining questions I have, a lot of them are for reports. So I'm going to, again, like I said, I'm going to leave them for the next session. If there's any other questions, either please post them to the community forum or feel free to email me directly and I will do my best to answer those questions. But thank you, everyone. Thank you for attending, and I look forward to having you all on the next sessions, upcoming sessions.